All right, everybody. Welcome. Good evening. Good evening. I apologize for the delay. We're going to get right into it. All right, so tonight we're talking about how to train your dog. And the most important, I'm going to try and build the mentality with you guys tonight on some of the things to be thinking about, some of the processes about how we're going to train our dog. But just keep in mind some key points. First of all, we're going to take a step-by-step approach to training our dog, okay? And we call that a training progression. How do we progress from step number one to the end step, right? How do we progress from the start to the finish? And that's going to be different for every dog and owner team, right? Or every household, okay? And what I mean from start to finish is when we first get our dog, we might have some basic goals in mind. Maybe we want to teach them some obedience. Maybe we want to teach them some specialized behaviors. As we get through that, maybe we decide, hey, I'd like to do this or I'd like to do that with my dog, right? So in that case, what we can do is continue to progress, and we can create more steps to our progression and continue to train our dog at different levels. So for me, training never ends. Even if I have a dog that's 7 years old and they've mastered all the basics, right? Is there other things that I can do with them, right? And those things, do they need me to create a training progression for them, right? So just keep in mind that a training progression is the steps that we need, the step-by-step approach to training our dog something, right? Some things, okay? So I just want to refer you to Pack Talk Podcast number episode 27. This is our podcast. Episode 27, we talk about learning theory, some of the very important topics that pertain to how does a dog learn. So primarily what we're going to be talking about tonight in our discussion is using classical conditioning and operant conditioning, all right? So to deep dive on those topics, go back to Pack Talk Podcast number 27. You can find it on our YouTube channel. We have a Pack Talk Podcast playlist, or you can find it on your favorite podcasting platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, Facebook, whatever, right? So you can find it on your favorite podcast platform. Also, episode 28 is essentially the audio version of the discussion we're going to go through tonight. We're probably going to go into some other details tonight as we just go through this, because I'm just talking as we go through it. But in episode 28 of the podcast, I do go through training progressions, right? What are the steps to training your dog, that type of stuff. And also a little note down here as we get to the remote collar portion of a training progression. Episode 19 is the facts and fiction of the remote collar, and we talk in detail about the remote collar conditioning process and some of the common misconceptions of a remote collar, and that's episode 19. So feel free to check those out later, right? Ben can probably put them in the show notes in the description as this thing is posted onto the YouTube channel, okay? So feel free to drop comments as we go through this, right? Ben will read them out to me. And for those that are wondering, Ben is my brother. So we did have some comments one time. Hey, we didn't know that Ben is your brother. So me and Ben are actually brothers. Interesting concept there. So I'm the better looking brother, obviously. So anyway, a couple points to keep in mind. As we're building a training progression, we want to progress at your dog's level, right? So some dogs might pick up things really quickly, right? They may be responding to the way you're moving and teaching them very rapidly, and you can progress very quick. Some dogs may pick it up a little bit slower. Some dogs may need help in one particular area more so than another dog. So, try really hard. I know it's hard not to do this, but do not compare yourself to your friend and their dog, right? Don't compare yourself to your brother and their dog, or your sister and their dog, your family member and their dog, the person that you're watching at the park. Don't compare yourself to them, right? Progress at your dog's level, and just understand in your head, think about, this is my goal, right? Maybe we're talking about a down, for example. My goal is for my dog to go down on command, right? And maybe I need to do something a little bit differently to help my dog do that. Or maybe I need to add in some extra repetitions, okay? So we are going to talk about a very generic progression on how to train your dog and most of the basic fundamental things that we want our dogs to be doing. But, you know, progress at your dog's level. Spend time doing things that your dog is struggling with. Do more repetitions of that. Things that your dog is really strong at, you don't need to spend so much time with, okay? So be flexible, adjust as needed, right? So adjust as needed. When you're progressing at your dog's level, you may have to adjust a few things here and there depending on how your dog is responding to them, right? So don't be afraid of that. And I am gonna lay out a generic progression, again, to accomplish the fundamentals of what most people want to accomplish with their dog with our methodology of training. But again, don't be afraid to adjust as needed. Maybe you don't like a step in our progression, right? Maybe you don't like an aspect of using the leash for this or using the leash for that. That's okay. Adjust as needed. Go back to episode 27, understand the principles of how a dog learns in their brain, right? Their physiology and all that, and then apply that to your training progression. Don't be afraid to experiment with a couple things, all right? But keep it fair for you and your dog, right? So we're using rewards a lot at the beginning of training so that we can build up behaviors, at least ideally, and then we slowly stop using those rewards as we go through the training progression so that we can maintain a certain level of behavior without using rewards all the time, right? So you need to understand those basic concepts of, you know, learning theory, some of the principles, what do rates of reinforcement do, how do they influence our dog and their behavior. So you're gonna find that very detailed in episode number 27. And we always appreciate feedback on the podcast and the videos we're putting out. So if it's too much detail, you guys let us know. We can do another video or podcast episode that breaks one aspect down, try to make it as simple as possible that fits in the overall puzzle piece, right? All right, so training progression, what are some things that most people want with their dog? Okay, so from my perspective, that would be obedience. What obedience is that? We want our dog to walk on a loose leash or heel with us, right? We want our dog to sit on command, down on command, stay when asked, right? And what is stay? If I ask my dog to down, stay, that dog's gonna stay there until told otherwise. And that could be a couple minutes, it could be a couple hours, right? And when I start talking about stays for a couple of hours, people think that's crazy, but you have to take your dog past the point in your training. You have to take your dog past the point of boredom. Your dog has to learn to get bored and continue to maintain behavior, and your training progression is going to help you accomplish that. All right. We also want our dogs to come when called, right? We want all these things on leash and off leash, right? We want our dogs to ignore distractions, right, that cause reactivity or that maybe arouse them, get them amped up. If you're walking by a squirrel and your dog wants to at the squirrel, right? Maybe you want your dog to ignore that squirrel, right? Maybe you want your dog to play tug with you, play fetch with you. So all these different things are, you know, the fundamentals of what most people want. The obedience, behavior in the home, to be calm, right, when needed, to be able to play when they want to play. Being good in a vehicle. Some dogs are crazy in the vehicle, pacing around, slobbering like crazy. These are all signs of anxiety. So how do we reduce that anxiety in the vehicle, right? How does our dog know when we go out to a hardware store or an outdoor shopping mall or out to eat to remain calm, confident, relaxed, right? And ignore distractions that are around them. What about interacting with other people? If I want other people to interact with my dog and pet my dog, how do I teach my dog to maintain composure in these scenarios, right? So that's what a general training progression is going to do. So I'm going to step you guys through our training progression. How do we teach a dog from start to finish these fundamental basic things that most people want, all right? So the first thing we're going to do, and I try to put the numbers next to it of our priorities. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to condition the verbal markers, right? So we basically have, you know, two basic types of verbal markers. We have a reward marker, so let me just write this up so you guys can refer back to it later. We have a reward marker, and then we have an accountability marker, right? Accountability, okay? So these are the two basic types, overall types of markers that we have. And what is a verbal marker? It's basically a word that pinpoints a moment in time to the dog that allows us to communicate to them when they're doing something wrong or right, and then we can reinforce them later depending on which route they're taking, right? So if I'm using a reward marker, if I say that word, it's going to tell the dog, you're doing the right thing right there, and I'm going to reward you at a later time, okay? And as we continue in our training progressions, that reward becomes random. So even if I ask my dog to sit and they sit and I say good, for example, a reward may or may not be coming, okay? But in the foundational stages of training, as I'm teaching my dog to sit, if I teach him to sit and I say good, that tells him, hey, that was the right thing to do, and a reward is coming for that. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. An accountability marker means the dog has not done what they're supposed to be doing. So if I ask my dog to sit and they don't sit, I can say no, and then I can apply a correction. That's traditionally going to be a leash correction or remote collar correction for us. And then, so we say no, that tells the dog that was the wrong thing, you're doing something incorrectly, and we can correct the undesired behavior. Okay, so those are the basic concepts of verbal markers. I have the words yes and good up here because these are what we're going to be using at first in our training. The word yes is what we call our terminal release marker, right? So if I mark a dog, if I ask them to sit and they sit and I say yes, they are released from that behavior and they can now come chase me for food, right? And we have other videos on the YouTube that go more into detail on that, so I'm not going to go into crazy detail on it. But just know that when I say yes, the dog is released from the behavior and they can come to us for a reward, which at the beginning of training is going to be a piece of food, okay? The word good is another reward marker. That's what we call a duration marker. So if I ask my dog to sit and they sit, I can say good. I'm going to deliver a reward to them. They're not coming to me. I'm going to them with the reward, okay? So if I say yes, the dog's released, they come to me. If I say good, the dog maintains what they're doing. I take the reward to them. I deliver the reward to them, okay? So I hope that makes sense. So the first thing we need to do is condition. We're classically conditioning these verbal markers. How do we do that, right? So classical conditioning means that the new thing, the new stimuli must come before the old thing. That's the very basic description of it, right? So what we do, we have a dog on a leash, usually a 6-foot leash. The reason for the leash is so that the dog cannot blow us off and walk off on us. So we have our dog out in our yard. We have it on a 6-foot leash. The dog's wandering around, sniffing around, whatever. The dog gives me some type of eye contact. I say yes. I start backing up, dropping my hand with food in it, and the dog comes to my hand and takes the food out of my hand. So the dog is learning a couple things. Number one, they're learning that if they look at me, they get to come to me. We get to play a little bit with some food. They get to chase me. And then number two, they're learning that the word yes is predicting food to them. And if I do that enough times, repetitiously, the word yes will equal food in their brain. So even if I say yes and don't give them food at a certain point, they'll still feel like they got food in their brain due to the chemicals in their brain. Again, I'm getting kind of sciencey on you guys. I don't want to get that complicated, but that's the first thing we're doing, conditioning the verbal marker. So we got the dog on a leash, dog sniffing around, whatever. They look at us. Yes, we back up, give them food, and then basically do it again. We reset, so I'll back up a little bit, dog sniffing around again. They look at me, I say yes, I back up, they can have food, okay? So I'm just gonna be doing that repetitiously, and the overall goal is conditioning the verbal marker yes, so I can use it later, okay? You know that word is conditioned if your dog looks at you, you say yes, you don't back up, and your dog just lurches forward towards you. That tells you that in their brain, right, they're already conditioned to moving to you, releasing from behavior, okay? The word good, the way we condition that, same thing. Dogs on a leash in the yard area, sniffing around, they look at us, I just say good. I step to them, I give them a piece of food. I might take a couple steps in a different direction. Good, step to them, get them food, and then repeat that, okay? So again, we're teaching them the differences here that yes, you're coming to me for food. Good, you're staying in position. we're also conditioning that eye contact to be something that they desire. They start to want to do eye contact with you as we're doing the conditioning process, because the eye contact is the key to access the food or the chasing you, which is fun and rewarding to the dog in their brain, okay? So I hope that makes sense. So once we accomplish that, we're gonna go to step number 2, which is engagement and focus. And one thing to keep in mind, these kind of intertwine a little bit, okay? So while I'm working on my step number 1, conditioning verbal markers, I'm actually also working on engagement and focus. How am I doing that? Because I'm waiting for the dog to look at me before I start conditioning about my verbal marker, which is thus building up the behavior of the dog looking at me, all right? I'm already accomplishing engagement and focus by working on my verbal markers. So these two things go hand in hand. Now, with that being said, what is engagement? Engagement is sustained focus on the handler or the trainer or the owner, or whatever word you want to use. Sustained focus on you. Why do we want that? Because we want the dog to be interested in paying attention to you so that you can teach them more precise things later, more advanced things later, right? If a dog doesn't care about you, doesn't care about paying attention to you, it's going to be really difficult to train that dog. Think about when you were in school, right? Some teachers, you enjoyed being around them and paying attention to them. Some teachers you didn't. And when you didn't want to pay attention to the teacher, that schoolwork became super difficult, right? So it's the same thing with the dog, okay? Focus building, again, looking at me or you instead of distractions that are around you. As you go through this process and you go out in your yard and you're building up these verbal markers with your dog and this engagement and focus, you're going to find that at the beginning, your dog's sniffing around, looking at squirrels, looking at whatever. But as you get this going and you condition these things, your dog's wanting to pay attention to you more than paying attention to things that are around you, which is what we want, right? Now that our dog is engaged with us and focused on us, now our dog's ready to learn some things, okay? And our dog's on a leash during this whole process, okay? And the type of collar that I would recommend you use at the beginning, some type of fur saver or martingale collar, because if the dog is backing up, if you have a flat collar on them, they could slip that thing off their head. We don't want that to happen, so a fur saver will tighten down, martingale collar will tighten down so they can't slip the collar. That's the purpose of it, okay? All right, so conditioning verbal markers and engagement and focus are going hand in hand. We're working on those together. Step number 3 is leash pressure, learning, right? Leash pressure is learning to follow the leash, learning to follow the leash, okay? Learning to follow the leash, leash pressure, okay? And funny enough, this is also going to go hand in hand with step 2 and step number 1, okay? So all 3 of these, you're actually working on them simultaneously at the same time, right? Which can kind of be kind of confusing, but why? How is this working? So you've got your dog on a leash, right? Your dog's off sniffing something. The leash is probably going to get a little bit tight. Your dog looks at you. You say yes. You start backing up with the food in your hand. Your dog comes towards you, chasing you, gets the food out of your hand. So what happened? The leash was tight. They move towards you. Now the leash is slack as they're moving into you. So they are learning that the leash is guiding them in the direction that they need to go, which is towards you. Hopefully that makes sense, right? So leash pressure is teaching the dog that instead of pulling on the leash, if you feel tension on the leash, you need to move in the direction of the leash, right? Not against it, you move with the leash, okay? And it'll be very clear when you have this accomplished, because you could start backing up, that leash gets a little bit tight, and as soon as that leash gets a little bit tight, your dog immediately is turning and moving with you in the leash, right? So you're accomplishing this when you're doing your engagement, your eye contact, and your yes verbal marker specifically. You're working on that leash pressure, right? But if it is not complete, if your leash pressure work is not complete, by the time you finish your engagement and conditioning your yes verbal marker, Well, in that case, you can continue to develop it. All you're gonna do is apply a little bit of tension to your leash. Your dog may be fighting it at first, but as soon as they just give into it, yes, you mark that and you reward, right? So your word yes is telling your dog, that's what I want you to do. You're doing the right thing. Now come to me and get a reward, right? That's what's happening during this whole process, all right? So again, leash pressure, you're working on it while you're doing your engagement, while you're conditioning your verbal marker, yes. But if it's not 100% complete, by the time you finish those two things, you're actually gonna teach your dog to follow the leash. All you're gonna do, you've got your dog on a leash, you probably back up a little bit, there's a little bit of tension on the leash. Your dog might be fighting that tension at first, but as soon as they give into it, yes, and then they can come to you for a reward, right? Hope that makes sense, okay? Trying to make it simple. All right, once we accomplish the leash pressure work, now we're gonna go into the obedience muscle memory. Now this is very, very important, all right? Most people, when they're trying to teach their dogs something, let's just use the sit, for example, what do? Sit, 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 here's a piece of food, here's a piece, sit, right? This is what's happening in households all over the world with people trying to teach their dog how to sit. And it's really not, I mean, sometimes you can kind of get a sit, or the people will tell me, you know, my dog will sit if I have a piece of food and if I, in my kitchen and blah, 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 right? Your dog doesn't really understand the word sit, it just understands the context of how you do that thing, right? So instead of verbalizing what we want, your dog has no idea what the word sit is. We have to teach them what that is. So if we're talking about training progressions, we're talking about taking a step-by-step approach. We need to break everything down into baby steps. How do I break a sit command up into baby steps? Well, first of all, we know that a dog is a non-verbal being. That means they do not communicate with verbal language, which means I need to not say anything to them other than the words that I have conditioned, which at this point are the words yes and good. Those are the only words that my dog has an association to. They don't understand that word, they just have an association to it, right? Classically conditioned. So with that being said, now I need to teach my dog obedience. My dog's a nonverbal being, so how do I do that? Well, I'm gonna use nonverbal language. We're gonna use a food lure. What a lure is I have a high value reward in my hand, and I manipulate my hand in different ways to help my dog maneuver their body. And whenever their body's in a certain position, I can mark with yes or good, because the dog knows that when I say these words, it means they're doing the right thing. So I can mark that behavior and then reward them for doing those things. Okay, so again, I'm gonna have a piece of food in my hand, high value reward. I'm gonna maneuver my hand around in certain ways, depending on what you're building. And the goal is to maneuver my hand, which maneuvers the dog's body, manipulates the dog's body into a certain position or halfway into a position. And once my dog is in a position that is suitable for my goal, I mark that with the word yes. I back up, I let them have a piece of food, right? So that's the overall concept. So obedience, muscle memory. What do we need to develop? We need to develop a heel position. We need to develop a sit. We need to develop a down, and we need to develop a stay and a come command. Those are the basics, right? Heel, sit, down, stay, come. The 5 basic obedience commands. Now, of course, there's others that we can do, but if we're talking about the fundamentals and basic things that most people want with their dog, those are the 5 things, okay? So let's break it down. If we need to develop the muscle memory for these things, what about the heel position? What do we need to break down with the heel position, right? So there's a couple things. Number 1, my dog is wandering over here. Heel position is on my left side for me, right? Your heel position may be on your right side. I'm just gonna talk you through what I do, right? So my dog might be over here. I need to teach them how to maneuver to my left side. How could I do that? I have a piece of food in my hand. My dog's on a leash, so they can't blow me off and walk off on me. I show them that I have food, and then I guide them with the food to my left side, have my hand turn them around and face my direction. Once they're facing the same direction as me, I can say yes, and then have them chase that piece of food. Okay? So that's one aspect of the heel position. My dog's walking around in front of me or off to the side or whatever. I've got them on a leash so they can't blow me off. I show them that I have some food. I use that food to lure them to my left side. And then once they're on my left side, I say yes, and I let them have the piece of food. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. That's one aspect of the heel position. Another aspect of heel position is walking. Heel position allows us to walk on a loose leash. So how do I do that? Well, when I have my dog next to me, I start walking. And I have a piece of food in my hand that they're sniffing, right? So they're next to me. I give it to them. I get another one out of my bait bag. I give it to them. I just repeat that process. And as long as they're next to me, they're going to get food rewards delivered down my left side because this is where I want them walking at, right here. I have an imaginary box on my left side, right next to my left leg, where I want the dog's head position to be in. And I put food rewards into that box and allow the dog to take food out of my left hand in this box. Okay? So that's another aspect of the heel position. And you're obviously going to have to do lots of repetitions of these things. Okay? Another aspect is turning. So if I'm walking and I need to turn left, most dogs are not familiar with that. They don't know what to do. They might walk in front of me. Now I'm tangled up in the leash. They might walk behind me. Right now, now I'm being turned around by my dog. So I need to teach my dog how to turn with my body. And my body might be different than your body. We all move a little bit differently, right? So the way that I do that, again, I've got a lure in my hand. The dog's following my hand, right? And then I just turn left. Once both of us have completed a left turn, I say good, and I give them a piece of food, right? Then I rinse and repeat. And so I do that for 90-degree left turns, good, give them the food. I could do it for a 180-degree left turn where I turn all the way around, good, give them the piece of food. I can do it for 90-degree right turns and 180-degree right turns, okay? So I want to get all those turns very, very comfortable with the dog comfortable with those turns. And as you do repetitions of this, your dog's going to start picking up on your body language before you do a turn. So you probably do something before you turn left, you're not even aware of it. You might move your hand like this or who knows, move your toe a certain way. Your dog picks up on these things, right? And so the more repetitions you do, the more your dog's picking up on those silent, nonverbal signals, right? Then the last aspect of the heel that I teach myself is an automatic sit. So whenever I stop walking, I want my dog to sit or down automatically without me saying anything. So I can talk to my neighbor, talk to my buddy, unlock my door without my dog being all over the place, right? So the way we do that, again, we have a food lure in our hand. We show the dog we have food on our left side. Whenever we come to a stop, we just simply lure them into a sit. Once they sit, we say good, we give them the food, okay? Repetitions of that build out that behavior, okay? So we're gonna be doing all those different things for the heel position, how to move from in front of me to beside me, how to walk with me and stay right here, how to turn left, how to turn right, and then how to automatically sit. Once we have all those very fluid with the dog, they don't have to be perfect. We're developing the muscle memory. So once my dog, at first when you're doing this, it might be struggling or figuring it out. Once it's very fluid for my dog and my dog is very easily following my lures and following me, I'm like, all right, the muscle memory is good for that one, okay? So we're doing that with every obedience command. So a sit, for example, I have a piece of food and I just show it to the dog's nose and I lift their nose up with the food until the butt sits. Once the butt sits, I say, yes, I give them a piece of food, right? So I do repetitions of that, and I'm very specific about trying to keep my palm facing up as I lure them up, because later my silent command might be a palm up for a sit command, right? So I lure them up, they sit, good, I give them a piece of food, right? I lure them up, their butt hits the ground, they're sitting, I say, yes, I back up, let them have the food, okay? So that's how I'm going to develop that. The down command, muscle memory, I lure the dog into a sit, and then I lure them all the way down to the ground. And most of the time when I'm first doing this, I'm down here with them, okay? All the way down. And a down command is your butt's on the ground and your elbows are on the ground. Your elbows cannot be halfway down. But some dogs struggle to go down at first. And so what are we doing? We're developing the muscle memory. We're developing it. We're not expecting perfection. We're not expecting precision at this point. We're just doing development of these behaviors. So what does that mean? When I'm teaching a down, if my dog may not be comfortable going all the way down. So what that means is maybe I reward my dog for going halfway down. Maybe I reward my dog for going a quarter of the way down. Maybe I reward my dog just for putting their head down. I need to take a baby step approach and help my dog be comfortable building and developing that down command, all right? So you need to do that with every obedience behavior that you're developing the muscle memory of. Figure out what your dog's most comfortable with and build from there, okay? Then the last one would be, well, you have the stay command, right? Stay command, your dog's gonna go down. I usually do this from the down. You lure your dog into a down, and then you have them stay there for longer and longer periods of time by rewarding at intervals of time, right? So if I lure them down, I might count to 10, then give them another reward if they stay there. If they get up, I'll just lure them down again, count to 10, give them another reward for staying there, right? So I'm gonna slowly build up the duration for that stay command, okay? And we did do another live stream on developing the stay, detailed out, so you guys can refer to that as well for more information on that. And then we got the come command. So for the come command, the way I'm going to develop that muscle memory is I've got a piece of food in my hand, I show it to my dog, and I start backing up, and then I stop and lure them into a sit. Then I say yes and let them have the food, or I say good and give them the food, okay? So the reason why I'm doing that is because I want my dog used to following me, and then whenever I stop and I do this, you're just going to sit, because when I say come, I want you to come to me and sit when you get there, okay? So that's how we're going to develop that muscle memory. Again, the whole concept with the muscle memory develop is we don't want it to be perfect, we want it to be fluid. So we want your dog comfortable with these movements, comfortable with your luring movements. Once we see comfort in all those obedience areas, right, then we're going to proceed to the next step, which is putting that obedience on command. Okay? All right, so putting obedience on command, all we're going to do is we are going to classically condition the word to that muscle memory. Okay? So again, classical conditioning, episode 27. So we're just going to classically condition, classical conditioning. How do I accomplish that? I'm going to say the word, the command, pause, and then do the muscle memory work, right? The muscle memory luring. So you're going to say the command, pause, lure. Okay, that's how you're going to accomplish this. So your dog, when you're doing the obedience muscle memory development, okay, you're essentially luring, right? You're getting all your lures built, okay? When you're doing your obedience on command, you're classically conditioning it, okay? So you're doing the command, pause, lure movement, right? So your dog's already used to the luring, so you're just putting it down here. So the way that works is, let's just take a sit, for example. You would have your body in like a neutral position. You're going to say sit, pause, and then you're going to take your food and lure your dog into a sit. And once they sit, yes, let them chase your hand with food in it, or good, and give them the food, okay? So again, command comes first. You take a quick pause. You don't have to say it, you just take it, and then you do the lure. And if you do enough repetitions of that, you're going to keep doing it. You're going to say sit, and your dog will, boom, just sit automatically. You don't have to lure in that case, obviously. You just say yes, and then you give them the piece of food. Once you see that, you know that the classical conditioning has taken effect. right? Let's do a down, or let's do a heel, for example. So your dog is out in front of you over here. You say heel. You have the piece of food in your hand. Show it to your dog. Lure them over here. Yes. Reward them, right? Repetition, repetition, repetition. Pretty soon your dog's over here. You say heel, and your dog just, boom, comes over here all by themselves. You don't have to lure. In that case, you say, good, give them the food. That muscle memory is completed. That classical conditioning is completed, right? And you're going to do that for every single obedience command, right? Come command, for example, you say come, you back up, show them the food, back up, lure to a sit, good, give it to them, right? After a certain number of repetitions, you say come, you don't move at all, the dog, boom, comes to you and sits, good, give them the food, classical conditioning complete, your obedience is on command. Does that make sense? All right, so you'll know your obedience is on command when you've gone through that process. You're saying a command and your dog performs the behavior, right? So we're getting kind of all over the place now. Got to separate this board out. All right, once we have the obedience on command, then we're going to introduce leash corrections. So that's going to teach the dog accountability, right? So whenever we're teaching accountability, at first, we're going to say no, right? Because we're going to classically condition the word no to be punishment, okay? So we do it with all of our obedience commands. So let's just take the heel, for example. So I tell my dog to heel because the heel is now classically conditioned. We're walking. I've got the leash in my hand, okay? The dog decides to walk ahead of me out of position. I'm going to say no. I keep moving. I'm going to say no. Tug on the leash. The dog's like, oops. They come back to good position. I say good. I reward them. Okay, so it is important at the beginning when you're introducing leash corrections that after you give a correction that you do reward your dog, because we're still balancing out this relationship. We're teaching the dog, hey, you stepped out of line. I'm going to give you a little leash correction for that. As soon as you come back to good position, I'm going to reward you for that. You know what I'm saying? So you're going to do that for every obedience command. You're going to make sure that throughout your day-to-day training, your day-to-day life, that whenever you're asking your dog to do things, if they're not doing it, you're going to say no, give a little leash correction. Once they do it, you say good, you give them a reward, right? So sit, for example, if I say sit, if my dog does not sit, I'm going to say no, pop on the leash. The dog sits, I say good, I give him a piece of food. And it's not a crazy, leash pop, right? You see these videos of people swinging dogs in the air and dragging them across the floor. Like, that's crazy. You don't need to do all that. It's just a pop on the leash, quick tug and release. The dog responds to that, you reward that, right? So it should be like you popping a towel. That's kind of the movement, all right? And because you've gone through this process, by the time you get to introduction of leash corrections, your dog will respond to them very efficiently, very effectively, the way you need them to, okay? So that's how we're going to introduce leash corrections. We do that for every obedience command that we've already got on command, all right? Once we complete that, now we're going to start our remote collar conditioning, okay? I'm not going to go into the details of that. We're talking about the big picture. How do we get from start to finish, right? But remote collar conditioning, Pack Talk podcast number 19, we do talk about in that episode the details of how do you do remote collar conditioning, okay? I'll tell you the first step is your dog's just going to wear the collar to become desensitized to it. So I'm wearing this watch right here. If I take this watch off, I still feel like I have it on. That's what we want with our dog. We want them to just realize that the remote collar is another collar that we're wearing all the time, okay? And Ben can link the podcast in the notes below once we get this posted later, okay? So you're going to do your remote collar conditioning process. Once you complete that remote collar conditioning, and the whole underlying premise of remote collar conditioning, we're teaching our dog what that sensation from the remote collar, because it's a strange feeling to the dog. They've never felt it before. It's basically like a TENS unit, right? So the dog's unfamiliar with this sensation. So we are teaching them that, hey, this sensation is is a normal thing. Nothing crazy is happening. But if you feel this, this is what you should do, right? So we're gonna equalize the remote collar to our leash correction. So let's say they disobey us, we say no, we stimulate on the remote collar, they respond to that just like they did the leash correction through the conditioning process. Okay, so that's what we're teaching in conditioning. Once we complete remote collar conditioning, we're going to now apply the remote collar to every area of our life and training. And what that means is I wrote it out right here, no bump tug. So the bump is a stimulation setting on the remote collar. It's just the push and release of the continuous button. That's our standard correction. So we have to apply the remote collar to everything that we do. So I might be out on a walk with my dog, right? And my dog goes ahead of me. If I have completed remote collar conditioning, now I'm doing remote collar application. My dog walks ahead of me. I say no, bump on the remote collar, tug on the leash, right? Because I'm still working on the conditioning of that remote collar to all areas of life. I'm applying it everywhere. So I need to really solidify that classical conditioning. Dog walks ahead of me. I say no, bump, tug. My dog is realizing that remote collar is the same thing as this leash. I move back to good position. I say good, give them a reward as I keep going. All right, I hope that didn't confuse anybody. Another example would be sit. Ask my dog to sit. They're not sitting for whatever reason. Maybe they're sniffing something or whatever. I've asked them to sit. I say no, bump on the remote collar, tug on the leash. That dog sits and their understanding of the remote collar becomes stronger. Their conditioning of the remote collar becomes stronger because I'm pairing it with the leash. And it's very, very important that you pause in between each one of these things. So you have to say no, pause, bump, pause, tug on the leash. And the reason for that is classical conditioning, episode 27. Classical conditioning, we need to achieve classical conditioning so that the remote collar equals the leash and our verbal no equals the remote collar, right? We need to achieve classical conditioning, and that means that they all have to have a slight separation between each step in the process. No, bump, tug, okay? So that's the remote collar application. You're doing that with everything remote collar related. And basically, you're just building your comfort level that your dog understands the sensation from the remote collar. Once you see that your dog's very fluid, understanding the remote collar very clearly, then you don't need to do the application no bump tug anymore. You're just going to no bump on the remote collar, okay? All right, so that gets us through remote collar application. After that, we're going to focus on long line and light line work. Basically, at this point, now we're going to start using longer leashes. And the reason for that is we want our dog to be operating away from us at a distance, and we want to get our dog ready for being off leash and learning that even at 30 feet away from me, if I ask you to come, you still got to come, okay? So what we do is we put the dog on a 30-foot long line, which is basically a 30-foot leash. We let them do whatever, right? And then we ask them to do something. And if they do it, we mark and reward that. You could say, yes, your dog should get up, run to you, right? 30 feet away. If they're really conditioned to the word yes, that'll happen. And then also the other thing too is remote collar at that distance. My dog may have been used to the remote collar next to me, but at that distance, are they still going to respond the same way? So if my dog's wandering around over there 30 feet away from me and I say down and they don't go down, if I say no, bump, are they going to go down? Or is there some confusion because now you're that far away from me? So if there is confusion, I still have that long line I can use to help me help you understand that everything applies across the board, right? You being the dog. So that's long line work. And again, this is a preparatory for off leash. So I'm trying to build up my comfort level with that dog at distances, operating with the remote collar, responding to commands. If I say come, I want to see you turn and start hauling to me, right? All these different types of things. So I'm building up my comfort level with the dog The dog's building up their comfort level with me and everything we've learned up to this point. And then we go into light line work. Light line is a safety line, right? What I do is I make these myself. I take some 550 parachute cord. I buy the lightest connector that I can find at the local hardware store. And the goal is that if I put that connector and the parachute cord together on the dog's collar, that the collar doesn't move at all, meaning that the line and the connector are so light that the dog can't tell that they're there. It's a safety net for me, right? If I have a long line, it's usually got a piece of brass or a stainless steel clip to it. I clip it on the dog's collar, it weighs it down just a little bit, right? Just a little bit, but the dog can feel that. The light line is so light, I put it on the dog, it doesn't weigh it down at all, so the dog doesn't really register that it's there all the time, okay? So with the light line work, I'm basically proofing all of my long line work, but I have the safety net of the light line. And if the dog doesn't obey properly, or if there's some confusion with the remote collar at a certain point, I can help the dog with that light line, right? If I say come and the dog's piddle-paddling around or it's chasing a squirrel, and I say no, bump, and now the dog's confused because it was chasing the squirrel and it feels the remote collar, I can use that light line to help guide the dog back to me, okay? So that's what that does. And I'm gonna continue light line work in my training sessions until I am 100% confident and comfortable that if I take all leashes and lines off that dog and only have the remote collar on them, that they're gonna do what I ask them to do. And if I need to communicate with that remote collar, they're gonna adjust to that properly and respond to that properly. So that's the whole point of the light line work, okay? All right. So like at 9, 10, 11, these are gonna kind of go hand in hand too. I'm gonna be doing a lot of these things at the same time, okay? So obviously number 11 is finalize off-leash reliability. So that's really going hand in hand with the light line work, okay? So I'm just going into different scenarios, different places, making sure that that off-leash reliability is actually there. That if I do need to communicate via the remote collar, if I do give a command in a new place, the dog is gonna respond to that even if the leash is not there. Vehicle and home protocols are behaviors in the home, right? So I'm looking to finalize those at about this time too. So in the vehicle, I'm okay if the dog's looking out the window and is calm. If the dog's trying to jump out the window, that's not calm, not good to go, right? So I'm gonna ask that dog to down. If they're not downing, I'm gonna correct them, right? So I'll usually have the dog in a sit or a down in the car. I'm looking for calmness, right? As long as they're calm, they're cool. If they're pacing around in the car or trying to chew something, that's a no-go. I'm gonna say no, give a correction, and then I'm going to ask the dog to down at that point, okay? And then home protocols, going in and out of doorways, sitting on pet cots, which we call spots, going to your spot when you're asked to go there, laying on a dog bed when you're asked. If Amazon comes to the door, you're not gonna bombard out the door, right? You're not gonna go try and grab the Amazon delivery guy. French bulldogs calling you out, right? You're not gonna go try and grab the Amazon delivery guy, for example, right? You're learning how to behave and respond to these things. Doorbells going off, right? Food on the counter. You're not gonna jump on the counter, try to get that food. French bulldogs, watching you guys, right? Some people don't want their dogs on the couch. So you're going through all this. You're making sure your dog understands your rules and boundaries in the house, which are different for each person, right? Some people don't let their dogs sleep in the bed. Other people want their dogs to sleep in the bed. Some people don't want their dogs on the couch. Other people do, right? Some people don't want their dogs barking when the doorbell goes off. Some people do. So you have to figure out what you allow in your house, what your rules and boundaries are, and build those up using the same principles that we talked about for the obedience, okay? So we finalize the vehicle and home behaviors to your specific liking. We finalize the off-leash reliability, and then we're going over here to socialization and distraction work. So socialization is providing the dog with positive experiences in close proximity to new people, places, and things. So when I'm doing socialization work, I'm taking the dog out. I'm doing engagement type sessions where I want the dog to look at me. I reward them for that. We walk through a farmer's market. We walk through a park. We walk past a playground. We walk, wherever. We go out to eat, whatever, right? There's cars, trucks, people, other dogs, animals, whatever. All this different stuff going on. And I'm socializing the dog by giving them a good experience, asking them to look at me, rewarding them for eye contact along the way. That's what socialization is. Distraction work is proofing your obedience behaviors in a distracting environment. So same thing, I go to a park, go to a hardware store, go to a farmer's market, go to a restaurant. I'm asking my dog to sit, down, stay, come, heel. I'm practicing these things everywhere. And if my dog's disobeying me, I'm saying no and giving a correction. If my dog's doing the right thing, I'm saying good, and I'm providing a random reward to them. Because at this point in the progression, I'm starting to get towards that random reward reinforcement schedule, which you can get more details on in episode 28 of the podcast, right? So socialization work and distraction work are grouped together for me generally, but I might have sessions that are just socialization work and sessions that are primarily distraction work, or I might have a session that's a hybrid of both. So you're going to have to make judgment calls and figure out what you need to do in regards to these two things. And there are a lot of times where I'm doing socialization work specifically. A lot of times I'm doing some of that up here, right, at the engagement and focus building. I might take my dog out to a park and do socialization work, but I'm also building up engagement and focus. So these can go hand in hand as well. Distraction work, you're going to wait to do that until you get through the remote collar. At least preferably off-leash reliability is complete. Then you can go out and do your distraction work, okay? Then once you complete all that, you're on your maintenance routine, which means you've done all this work. Maybe it took you 4 weeks. Maybe it took you 6 weeks. Maybe it took you 3 months. Who knows, right? You've gone from start to your goal for that, and now you need to maintain that, right? Which means you need to come up with a daily routine where you're able to incorporate your training into it throughout the day, and you're able to randomly reward your dog for doing the right things, and then you're able to hold your dog accountable for doing the wrong things, right? That's what a maintenance routine is. So taking your dog out to go potty. Are you going to do some obedience after your dog goes potty? Do you have some type of sequence that you follow for feeding your dog? Maybe you make them do a downstay for 5 minutes, and then you can let them come to their food bowl, right? What about going in and out of the door? Do you have your dog sit before you go out the door to go potty, right? What about your walks, your daily walks with your dog? Are they walking in heel position with a loose leash, right? So incorporating everything you've accomplished, you do need to maintain it. If you just stop doing your training stuff, you don't have to do it to the level that you were doing it earlier in your progression, but you do have to do it to a maintenance level. If you just stop, it could go away, it could degrade, right? But if you maintain it, if you keep doing it, you will continue to maintain that level of training, and then you can build upon it from there, depending on what you want to go to from there, okay? So I'm going to grab this marker. You guys let us know if you have any questions, because I'm going to, if I can get this marker, I have one more thing I'm going to write down, okay? That's the overall gist of a basic training progression, right? So as I erase this, I just get that one more time before I erase it. That way they can pause the video if they need to pause it. Anybody in the future? That's a nice whiteboard. What do you think, Ben? Is that a nice whiteboard? It's a nice whiteboard. All right, so I'm just going to write down a couple of underlying premises that I want you guys to think about as you're doing any type of training or any type of training progression with your dog, okay? So just give me a second to erase this here. All right, and we also need to put episode 19 up here. That is your remote collar episode. All right, so what I call your fundamental training protocols, right? Fundamental training. Oops. Protocols. Probably misspelled something. Protocols. All right. So, number one, if your dog's doing the right thing or something that you like them to do, right? Dog doing something I like, right? If the dog is doing, this is ticking me off right there. If the dog is doing something I like, right? I'm going to say good. I'm going to say good and provide a random reward. Okay? So if the dog's doing, and this is going to be after you complete your training progression, this is more for your maintenance. If the dog is doing something I like, I'm going to say good and provide a random reward. Now this could be food, physical touch, or a toy. Okay? In general, those are going to be your three primary types of rewards. Okay? Second thing, dog doing something wrong. Okay? If your dog is doing something wrong, maybe they're barking at another dog in the neighborhood, maybe they're chewing on your carpet, maybe they're peeing on the floor, right? Maybe you ask them to sit and they don't sit. Say no and provide a correction. Remember, this is after you've completed your training progression. This is for maintenance, right? So after my dog has been taught everything I expect of them and all the fundamentals of training, right? If they're doing the right thing or something I like, I'm going to say good and provide a random reward. If they're doing something wrong, right, or stepping out of the boundary, I'm going to say no and provide a correction. And if you do these two things in your day-to-day routine, your dog's going to understand what your expectation of them is, and you're going to maintain the level of training that you work so hard to achieve, right? And this is the key right here. So this means that you have to set yourself up for success, right? If you're using a remote collar for a correction tool and you don't have your remote collar on your dog, you're not helping yourself, right? If you're using food for your rewards and you don't have them available, right? You're not helping yourself, right? Thankfully, with the rewards, you can fluctuate between these things, and then also because of your verbal marker conditioning, you don't have to give a reward all the time, right? It's going to be a random reward anyway. But your corrections do need to be very consistent, because if you just say no, no, no all the time, but never give a correction, your dog's like, that word no don't mean nothing. I can still eat this countertop right here or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Eat out the trash, right? So you got to say no, provide a correction. It has to be consistent, okay? And those are the fundamental training protocols for maintenance of your behaviors once you complete your training progression, okay? Any questions? No questions? All right, last but not least, let me give one example, right? One example of building a training progression, because I want you guys to be thinking about, I want to do something with my dog. How can I build a training progression for that? I want to do something with my dog. How can I build a training progression for that? So, let's say I want my dog. What's an example of something that people want their dog to do? Come to them, right? Yeah. So So training progression, right? Don't jump on people, yeah. Yeah, so let's just use not to jump on people, right? Progression of not jumping. So I have to be able to think about this, build this out from start to finish, right? So what are some things I'm thinking about? Well, I'm thinking about I need all 4 paws on the ground. So everything that I do in my day-to-day life has to be geared towards my dog maintaining all 4 paws on the ground. If I let them hug me at home, that's what people say, oh, my dog likes to hug me, right? Your dog doesn't like to hug you. You're conditioning your dog to hug you, right? If you're teaching your dog to paw you, right? If you're teaching your dog to put paws on your shoulders, you're working against yourself. You're not keeping all 4 paws on the ground. You're working against yourself for not jumping. So what am I going to be doing? I'm going to be rewarding all 4 paws on the ground in my day-to-day life. I'm rewarding this, okay? Second thing I'm thinking about, I'm building a progression for not jumping, right? I want to make sure I'm rewarding my dog for keeping all 4 paws on the ground. I'm also thinking about what should my dog do when people pet it? Should I teach my dog to do something? Maybe, so let's just write that down. Teach dog what to do when getting petted. Is that a word? Petted, right? So you could teach your dog to sit, right? You could teach your dog to down, right? You could teach your dog to stand. Whatever, right? You can teach your dog something. You're going to do one of these things while you're getting pet, right? So first of all, we're rewarding all 4 paws on the ground all the time, routinely at first. And then we need maybe teach our dog what to do when they're getting pet, right? So how do I do that? I build a sit command, I build a down command, I build a stand command, whatever. And then lastly, what happens if dog does jump? What happens? They get a correction, right? So I have to teach my dog what a correction is, so on and so forth, right? So what I would do in this case is this would be something that comes towards the end of the training progression that we already went through, where we go through all of our obedience, we go through the remote collar, we go through the off-leash. This would be something that I finalize towards the end, the socialization distraction work. I'd be finalizing this, or the home protocols. I'd be finalizing. I'm like, okay, now I want to wrap some not jumping in there. I'm going to think about these 3 things. You might have to break them out a little bit more, work on them piece by piece until you get the behavior that you really desire. Okay, so just trying to get all of our minds geared towards, if I want something, if I want my dog to do something, what is the progression to get there, right? What are the steps that I have to take to get there? Maybe I have to get a whiteboard and write down, what are all my thoughts? Maybe I take a picture of that, I send it to Canine Revolution on YouTube or Facebook. Hey, here's a picture of what I'm thinking. What do you guys think? Or get on the phone with us, whatever, right? We're here to help you guys. So progression for not jumping, these are things I'm thinking about. Me personally, I like dogs sitting or standing when they're getting pet. Down, it's okay, but down is a very submissive position, and if people are all hunching over the dog, rubbing all over it, it can make some dogs uncomfortable, so it also depends on your dog. But sitting and standing are cool for me for the most part. I'm looking for all 4 paws on the ground, right? That's what I'm big on, and if one of the 4 come off the ground, this is happening, the correction, which means I have to have taught that correction, which is why this type of progression comes after I've already completed the remote collar, at least, because the remote collar allows me to get that very precise correction into the dog, okay? So anyway, We talked about training progressions tonight. We went through a lot of information. And a training progression is how you teach your dog. You follow the learning theory principles that you'll find in episode 27 of Pack Talk Podcast, right? Those learning theory principles feed into your training progression, and whatever you want to train your dog, whatever that is, sitting, downing, the whole thing we went through, right? How to make a well-mannered dog, train a well-mannered dog, all those different things. A training progression gets you from the start to the finish, okay? So I hope that makes sense. Do we have any questions, comments? All right. You guys leave your questions and comments in the video. Even if you're not watching this live, leave it in there. We'll respond to it, right? We appreciate all feedback. Whatever you guys want to see in the future, you let us know. We try to make videos based on what you guys are wanting. And we appreciate your support. And until next time, out.